There's not enough praise I can heap on Malcolm X.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
And speaking of connecting with everybody, this will be a great way to start off
I'm sorry.
today's today's class. This is the book club where we are covering Blueprint for Black Power, Chapter 14, Race and Economics. Lots of pages to cover, but again, I had a great experience of reading it. What is the caveat that the Black community should consider when establishing an economic system? Social relations, when Amos Wilson is talking about the importance of it, and also what it is, and what factors come with social relations, because a lot of people may think that it's just about what do we have in common, what is it that we both like, but really it's more in depth in terms of interests, shared experiences, nationality, languages, the culture side of it. Basically, what I got from that was having the we. It gave me a better understanding of what Hollop's been talking about, when you have to have a we in order for anything to move, or anything to be organized.
The very first page, when he talked about in order for economic system to evolve within a group,
Hmm.
um, and just that whole portion ending with has to be a functional level of trust and fidelity. And I thought that was so critical. Fidelity meaning, getting the dictionary definition, faithfulness to a person, cause, or belief demonstrated by continuing loyalty and support.
Hmm.
The opposite of infidelity.
Yes, but critical. I mean, just critical.
When we are dealing with this level of trust in our community, there seems to be such a large amount of lack of trust, which
Mm.
kind of impedes us from kind of getting to um, uniting with each other, because that was something that I was thinking about, and I've been doing a little bit of reading on this um, post-traumatic slave syndrome, where you have people of our culture who have been sort of conditioned not to kind of trust one another.
Can I build on the trust part?
Mm.
Go ahead.
Because I think that we have to. It's not. I don't think that trust is the issue so much as how we interpret trust. Because other nations don't trust each other either,
Right.
but they don't require trust as a prerequisite for doing business.
They don't trust each other, but they trust the
No, they
community.
trust. They trust that it's sort of like
That the community going to work for the community.
no, not so much that. It's so much that their self interests are aligned, and it's more beneficial to work together than it is to not.
Hmm.
So it's really selfish in a way, but it actually helps the group, if that make any sense. Like I think it's a lot like if we understood that, we would recognize that it's easier to do business with people that you don't know,
Mm.
strangers, than to do business with friends and family. It's actually easier
Hmm.
because it's not trust is not the prerequisite. You don't have to trust them. The only thing you have to trust is that they'll do what they're supposed to do because it benefits them.
That's it. Yes. Yes.
You don't even have to like people you do business
Right.
with.
Exactly. Have to or work with.
Yeah. So it's like we have to just redefine how we perceive the trust thing. It's trust that you have amongst family and friends, and then it's trust in business. And really, you're not supposed to trust in business.
Right. Right.
Everything works off of contracts.
I was wondering, how does that point, you know, balance against what Wilson talks about in the chapter when he talks about the Koreans and Chinese that get a lot of their funding from their own families?
Hmm. It's in their interest, though. in their interests.
And it's in their culture too.
Mhm.
Like they have the benefit of not having their culture decimated.
Constantly attack the focus. I mean, and something that I was thinking about when going through this chapter was that we can definitely um, take lessons, learn from, be inspired by how other groups go about doing business, how they handle economic prosperity. But we have to keep in mind that we do not have the same path. It's a different situation for us, and incorporate that. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Not try to lockstep or step by step go by what everybody else has done. It's always important to remember our situation and how we can incorporate um, how other folks
Yeah, you
handle
take what's
business.
useful. It's the Bruce Lee
Yeah,
method.
and I think sometimes that gets lost when I hear some of our folks talk about almost with undue reference. I think
Hmm.
other people, and
Mhm.
it's like number one, no other group is perfect. And we have a lot of value with how we operate. We're not the scum of the earth, and we have to just sit with our mouths open in wonderment at everybody else.
Right.
That
Look at the
that's
Chinese.
yeah. That look at the
They
Jews,
human
look at
traffic
this,
their
look at
own
that.
people.
hmm Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was like you look at what other and that's another thing, because another group is successful. Definitely don't look at just the result. Look at how they got there, because it could be the worst possible way to get there.
Mhm.
To get to some economic prosperity. If it's like with talking about with our history with slave trading, it's like, oh, but so and so, this plantation plantation owner was a billionaire or a millionaire by today's dollars, what have you, and built this institution and that institution, and was philanthropic. It was like, okay, well, how did they get to it? Well, they were plantation owner. What was on the plantation? Oh, human beings, our people. You know, so that's wonderful that he was philanthropic and created all these institutions and all of these businesses and what have you. But how that person got to that point is important also.
Yeah, and I think taking it to the second question, like what chapter or what section of the chapter interests you when it comes to race and economics, going back to what we've read based on the Chinese and the Koreans,
hmm
I think that was very interesting because to me, like I've gotten angry on how they exploited the Rodney King verdict back in the 90s,
hmm
and the Koreans had a lot of their stores damaged, from restaurants to laundries and and retail shops from African Americans, being fueled by what was going on during that time period. And for them to bounce back, the Koreans, they had pretty much had to feed I guess, like the ego with African Americans, because we're so caught on being accepted and being loved, by non-African people in order to be treated right. And the Koreans just took part into it.
Yeah.
Where you see in the book, they talk about examples of creating scholarships, with minorities for Koreans and blacks. Having Al Sharpton do a prayer for one of their ceremony events,
Oh boy. Yes.
and and it reminded me of the song from Undisputed Truth, very old school song called "Smiling Faces," and
Oh
smiling.
yeah.
And they said
Yeah.
smiling faces in the lyrics, sometimes they don't tell the truth. And this is a pure example of it. Just because they are pretty much creating opportunities, for our people down in that area, doesn't mean that it's genuine. And even if it is genuine, they wouldn't sacrifice that in order to lose the power that they have or they're trying to establish and be dominant over.
That's right. Their investment is pennies in comparison to what what the return will be for them.
Right.
Absolute pennies. And it's the way we got to think. But you made the point of so many wanting to be loved and respected by every other group. In order to justify being, it seems like you just got to have that smile and that what they consider a loving look in their direction. And it's like, oh, everything's okay. This other group approves of me, so I
Yeah.
must be okay.
Because our people, they're big on satellite communities or creating an Africa town, but not knowing, we have to have a nation that could support that.
Right.
And when you see it in the chapter, you could see how far or the potential of what a satellite community can do when they have, a home base. Not only you would have just businesses, but you'll also have associations where if you have Africans from different countries that are coming to America, they could possibly go through that association to either learn the language better. They could know their way around the city. They will have that support when it comes to whether housing or education. And you could see that with what the Koreans did, in terms of having their own business association, having small investors that come together, 5 weeks or 10 weeks to accumulate money, so then everyone has a piece of the pie, when they're wanting to build their own and things like that. And then it just expands. And even, and I guess just to say, like, even when you have our people that want to have their own business, whether what industry it is, still we go back to the previous chapter, the means of production and where's the support coming from? Who is going to invest in that and want to be a partnership? Or was there any section in the chapter that gravitated towards you guys when reading chapter 14?
Oh, you know what
Oh,
you
okay.
say underrated. A lot of parts of reading this chapter, I feel a lot of anger because I was thinking to myself that it's this book is telling you various ways on how we can unite and things that Blacks can do to be supportive of each other. And I'm just trying to figure out like what is like the missing link that kind of keeps us from developing a little bit better economically.
To me, it's the low self-esteem, the non-belief in self, and the hammering away at our people in this country for, let's say, a couple of centuries, 2, 3 centuries, that everything and everybody else is better than you. And I think that is set in. It's
Hmm.
been a constant um, drumbeat, and it's just in the self-hatred and you know self-destruction has continued because of that, and it just stops us. I'm being general, not obviously not everybody, but enough of that, and people who prosper in this country, especially now, it's to they do well by dumping on us, and it's incentivized. So when you look at you see I talk about my people if I'm on TikTok or YouTube and I'm trying to do things to help them, whatever. But I get a lot more if I start calling myself something else, and the only group I'm attacking is my folks.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, and you can maybe convince yourself, oh, this is all show business, and I'm getting paid from it, but it has an effect, and it is in general incentivized. You do better. We talk about the algorithms and what have you, but you do better discussing our community in a negative way, instead of trying to inspire and do things positively.
Yeah. Seems like a lot of things have to be redefined.
I'll just briefly.
Okay.
Um, I see the main issue really coming from what we talk about in chapter 3 and 4, essentially the Black identity and how it's defined nationally in the country, um, it's like once that seed is planted in you that you're inferior, you'll only aspire to not be so. And he covers a little bit at the end of chapter 14 when he talks about these existing black elite whose only ambition is to integrate in and dissociate from other black people. But that comes down to the whole idea in the earlier chapters when he talks about the Black American culture and identities, that the people don't see themselves as separate from everybody else. They see themselves, generally speaking, as, or aspiring to be, generally speaking, more American, not realizing, the disadvantages of falling into just exclusively that identity when everybody else sees that identity as secondary. That's the gateway into the broader marketplace, but the beneficiaries are their single cultural identities that they take with them, their primary identities, be they Chinese, Korean, all the other examples he talks about in the book. That comes first. American comes second. That's the market. That's the society that they exist in. Whereas with us, it's reversed. A lot of the time, this American first to escape from that African identity, and that causes everything you do, right or wrong, to always work against your own interests. And he talks about that in chapter 4 when he's talking about the group consciousness and the white consciousness versus black consciousness. He exactly states that point. Until that gets flattened out, until that gets stamped out and eliminated, it's going to be hard to serve your own first, and do it in a way that actually returns the benefits to your own. Because if you're not working for somebody else, period, when you try to do something, you won't be doing it, I believe, as earnestly and as honestly as possible. So that's my takeaway, and he talks about that at the end of the chapter.
What should black people go for first when establishing satellite communities, commonwealth or generational wealth?
You gotta have somebody to disseminate the wealth and the culture and the instruction, if you will. So generational wealth, meaning that you have the family, the legacy, and kind of like the instruction, is probably going to better benefit the community as a whole, as long as the generations stick to the plan. Generational wealth, because if you give the wealth to the community, we gonna have too many Jordans in the street. So it's just like I think that there's part of it that's just like y'all gotta like the reality that the culture itself is broken is part of that thing. They're dealing from a culture where they still have faith in the community.
Yeah, now that's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, most of my
And
interactions have been fine, but yeah, that's a good
yeah,
point.
yeah, and it's kind of weird because as much as I've seen some people have nightmares dealing with those contractors, like black contractors, for every bad one, I've heard a story where it's been a great success, and they have this one guy that they always go to because he'll get it done early,
Yeah.
he'll get it done under budget, and he'll get it done to, like, I'd say master of the craft level competency. So it just depends, and again, and that means it's not, even though the culture is broken, it's not irreparable because it just comes down to individual relationships. If you meet that right person and they're competent, then I'm just going to tie this to the answer to question number 3, which I thought was different from generational wealth, because by default in a capitalist society we're all locked into atomization and building generational wealth on our own, or even if we live around other people, because it's just a selfish thing. But I feel like it could be done simultaneously, because when you hire that contractor, he's feeding his kids and he's building his generational wealth, building your business, and your business is going to take care of your kids. So you realize that there's like an interdependency, there's a synergy between you and them. So I feel like when it comes to establishing those satellite communities, it's generational. It's both at the same time, but the focus is on commonwealth, because everybody's benefiting from the creation of work and the creation of businesses. It creates that interdependent feedback loop that grows a community. So I think generational wealth is the default, but commonwealth should be the primary goal, because that's already kind of baked in.
I thought of commonwealth too because I was thinking with Amos Wilson talking about the group identity, and having different people of personalities and such, where all of their interests is pretty much set aside for that common goal. And I'm thinking with that produces, commonwealth. And then also I think the byproduct would be generational wealth too.
Right.
So I'm
Right.
thinking in a way both matters, but probably commonwealth will go first, and then under that umbrella is everything else.
What I decided was definitely it's going to have to be, in order for us to really flourish, it's going to have to be a situation where we're not here. This would be a satellite. This wouldn't be, this wouldn't be to do it right here. No question, it couldn't be do it right here. This would have to be the satellite. We'd have to set up shop somewhere else on the continent
I mean, even if because the thing is that
to work it
because that's
out.
going to take finances too, right? At the very minimum, we need to buy a couple thousand acres and build a community of us here.
Well, there are ways of doing
At the
that.
very minimum.
Well, there are ways of doing things without necessarily buying a couple thousand acres.
Well, no, I make that statement because the thing is that if we can identify the people of like mind, and everybody was committed to actually going, like, of actually building a place, like a base of operations, right? We can move to headquarters once we get organized.
Chapter 15 is going to be Afrika Agonistes. I definitely got to look up that word.
Yeah, I know. I was like, what? I was saying agnostic at first.
Right. I said the same thing.